This morning was a talk by Rob Jackson. We should thank Rob as one of the organisers of this day with Richard, and he's going to talk about Patrick, influence and inspiration.
Okay, well, hello everyone. I'm Rob Jackson from Keele University, and I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about a number of aspects of Patrick, his influence on our scientific field, his influence on me personally in my career, and show you a few photos which lighten the atmosphere a bit in advance of lunch. So let's see how it goes. First of all, see if I can operate the equipment. Right, so we'll talk about influence. Essentially, something about Patrick's influence on scientific conferences and scientific meetings and various things like that. Mention his textbooks, and I should say that the publishers of his most recent textbook on thermodynamics have set up a display at the back of the room, which you're more than welcome to have a look at during the lunch break and later. And then something about inspiration, and particularly inspiration of Patrick on my research and my career. First of all, something about conferences, and many people here will know about this particular conference series, the Eurodim ICDIM conferences. These are conferences on defects in insulating materials, and they're done every 2 years, alternating between European and generally international locations. And Patrick was very influential as a member of the advisory committee and also attending many of those conferences. The first one I ever attended was organised by Sean and his colleagues in Dublin, and I'm very pleased that Patrick was able to attend the Eurodim that I organised in Keele in 1998. That was sadly the last one that he felt able to attend of that series of conferences. Okay, so the first photo I wanted to show you was this one, which was the organising committee for the very excellently named LATDIC 82 conference. And the picture was taken, Sean tells me, at University College Dublin, organising committee meeting in 1981. So you can see sort of some youthful versions of some of the people present. Who's this man, for example? The gentleman there, and Patrick in his normal position at the front. And maybe you can recognise a few of the other personalities in this picture. There'll be a test at the end to see how many name. Right, so a couple of pictures of Patrick at these conferences. The main thing you could deduce from this one, this was Parma, and this was Keele in 1998, that was 1988. He grew his hair between 1988 and 1998. He was, I remember him very much at the Parma meeting, and he was tremendously helpful to me in my organisation of the conference in '98. So I was absolutely amazed that I still had this in my sort of obsessive filing system. But in 1989 in London, Ontario, there was a retirement symposium organised. Retirement is saying very much in inverted commas there, because as you know, Patrick never actually retired. He continued working right up the last days. And this conference, I was very fortunate to be able to attend, and it's probably rather difficult to read that from here, but anyone who's interested in seeing the details, I have copies. I can give you the programme. But so it took place in September 1989. And the interesting thing about it, actually, I was going to have this as an appendix for the talk, but I think it's quite interesting to put it here. it's the talks who actually were speaking, and so we had a talk from Richard here. Roger Batesold, who was one of Patrick's scientific collaborators at Kodak, Alistair, who's also with us here, myself, and then these gentlemen who were working with Patrick at the time on particularly molecular dynamics. And then the afternoon, the silver halides, which I'll say something about later, with Fiona Healy, who was one of Richard's PhD students, Yen Tan, who was another visitor, who I'll mention later. Larry Slift being a great character in our field, and various other people. Also Mary Ann White is here, and she gave a talk at that meeting as well, and Alan. And it all finished in dramatic fashion, I remember, with a talk from Sean. Okay, so that was the meeting. And photos. So we have, as 4 wise gentlemen, I think Sean's the only one who's got his drink with him. But anyway, and, Alan Allnut seems to be thinking about something else at that. Here's more characters at this meeting. Obviously, someone's told a joke. So Patrick's very amused. So Yen Tan here, and Roger Batesold and Richard in the middle. Another one from the meeting. I'm not sure who this gentleman was. Someone might be able to tell me. No? Well, anyway, this was at the sort of party at the end of the symposium. I'm horrified looking at this picture to see how I'm aged. That was in, I think, probably in Bill Meath's house. And here's Bill Meath. So I got in touch with Bill Meath last week. He wasn't, he's fine, but he wasn't able to travel to attend the meeting. I've also been in touch with Roger Batesold, who sends best wishes to everyone. He's also happily retired. He tells me that he has several computers that run calculations in the background, so he's still doing research on topics that interest him, which is excellent. There are a number of conferences in the UK where Patrick came, and the series of meetings that Richard organised at Mansfield College, very much Patrick used to like to attend those whenever he could. We did organise a meeting also to mark his retirement, but I don't have a photo, but the one for the year before was or a couple of years before, was the very important meeting that was organised in the 50th anniversary of the Mott Littleton paper, and Patrick's here, and various other noted people from the past. We had hoped that Alan Lydiard would be able to attend today, but he wasn't able to for personal reasons, but because of various people there, and of course Marshall's on that picture as well. So these conferences Patrick attended, always made a very important contribution to them, and really was kind of leading light at these meetings. So I want to say something about Patrick's influence. I first met him in the early 80s here at UCL, but it was really at Keele when I properly worked with him, and particularly remember a visit. I dug out my old diaries to find out the dates, and it was 1986. He visited Keele in August for 2 weeks. Sean, Roger Batesold and Yen Tan was there, and the visit included the bank holiday weekend, and the weather was as bad as it often is at Keele in the summer. Driving rain, wind, you name it. And during that meeting, Patrick exclaimed that one of the days there was the second worst day of his life. That was in 1986.
We never got him to tell us what the worst.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because Roger Batesold, when I was emailing him just last week, said that at the banquet after, in 1989, you know, after the UWO, the Western Ontario meeting, he seems to think Patrick did say what it was, but he doesn't remember. So, but I want to actually say a little bit about this, because at the time, you know, how's the world changed? You know, these days I teach a solid-state chemistry course. I've been teaching it for years. I still include the photographic effects. I think it's a really nice piece of solid-state chemistry. But the students look at me like I'm a dinosaur. I certainly am. But then I tell them, well, actually, it is still used, because if you want to get your digital photographs you know, nicely printed in a photo lab, the chances are they might still use this kind of technology. But anyway, back in 1986, one of Patrick's great interests was developing new potentials for the silver halides. And we just, round about that time, stopped using the Hades code, and we were using Cascade of blissful happy memory. This was based on Hades. It's a code that preceded Gulp. If you've only ever used Gulp, you've never really lived. Cascade was got you the results, but you really had to work hard for it. And we won't even start on Hades. So I showed Patrick how to use it, and that was my. So I can possibly claim a small amount of having helped him at that stage. And he then used it a lot, and they were developing the potentials. And this paper came out. Now, I have got a copy of this eventually, but the interesting thing about this paper was Roger Batesold, Richard, Sean, Fiona Healy, Patrick, Maurice Leslie, and Yen Tan, all co-authors. It's the Journal of Physics and Chemistry of Solids. And in these days of journals being available online, papers being available online, I think, well, that's great, I'll be able to get a PDF. So you click on this little button here that says download PDF, and it says enter your credit card and $30. Now, as I said to Roger Batesold, this paper is definitely worth $30, but there is a principle involved, and we don't do that kind of thing in academia. We don't do that kind of academia. So I got him to scan in a copy. It's a very well sort of thumbed and marked copy. Yesterday he sent me a much nicer copy, but this is the paper, and this is a paper that very much resulted from some of the work that Patrick was doing during that 2 weeks at Keele, and of course later on from that. So before kind of moving on from that, one thing that occurred to me during Sean's talk was I was thinking those days when Patrick visited us in Keele. The tradition we had in Keele was we'd work in the evenings, but at 10 o'clock we'd go to the local pub, the Sneed Arms, which we'd be glad to know is still going strong. And every time we went there, we always had the argument with Patrick about whether we could go back to work after we left the pub. And he never got his way, but he always wanted to. He wanted to go back at 11 o'clock and carry on doing his cascade calculations. But sadly, he didn't win that particular one. But probably for us, it's made us much better. Something about his influence, textbooks he's written, group theory one and the thermodynamics one, which actually came out after his death, and the thermodynamics one is mentioned very much. There are copies of it. You can have a look at the back and pick up a flyer if you're interested. I also wanted to, something else that came to me this morning was that I guess my last scientific collaboration that I had with Patrick was in the late 90s, and I've been doing some modelling of ammonium perchlorate and other molecular organic materials. And I got an email out of the blue from Patrick one day saying that he was doing some work on ammonium perchlorate funded by an explosives company, and he wanted to do molecular dynamics simulations of ammonium perchlorate. It was an interesting thing to do, seeing as it's an explosive material, and perhaps a bit safer to do the molecular dynamics than to do the experiments. And then about a couple of hours later, I got another email from him saying, I shouldn't have sent you that email because all this is highly confidential work funded by the Canadian government, so please disregard it, but can I still use the potential? So he did use the potential, and I never really, I think the problem was, as many people here know, when you transfer potentials from static calculations to molecular dynamics, it's not always a smooth transition. And in particular with this, because we have all kinds of weird potentials in it, like harmonic terms and Morse potentials, because of the covalent nature of the material, it probably never really got very far, but he certainly tried very hard to make it work, and sent me regular emails, this is the latest file, what do you think has gone wrong? So we had a lot of collaboration on that in the late 90s. When I began my career, scientific career, I contacted Patrick, and he gave me these very wise words about research plans, talking about being realistic. So, don't promise the world, but show that you have plenty of ideas and that you'll be able to develop a program, and you'll be able to, these will be things that you'll be able to do yourself, but also employing future graduate students. And as I began my career, I definitely took those words to heart, and very much have continued to do so ever since. And I'm extremely grateful to Patrick for his encouragement, in those early years, and also throughout the time that we were collaborating, or at least meeting regularly at conferences. So I'm going to say something now about my recent research, so a little bit moving away from the personal recollections, just to give you a little bit of science at the end. And my work is very much focused on using modelling to look at materials for specific applications, particularly optical devices, but also recently materials relevant to nuclear energy generation. And the optical materials area was something I very much picked up at the Eurodim and ICDIM conferences, and with encouragement also from Patrick. So, and again, this is sort of comes full circle. I started off as a postdoc here at UCL in 1981, doing fission gas modelling in UO2 with Richard, and we published a paper on this in 1986, which reported the new potential and was widely used for many years. But nuclear energy became an acceptable term again about 5 or so years ago, and collaboration with Mark Reed, who I'm delighted to say is here, we revisited that work and published a new potential on UO2. And this is very much ongoing work, because there's now a lot of interest in uranium dioxide and on similar materials and related materials. And so this is kind of very, very topical. But this was the material what I was doing when I first came in contact with Patrick in the early 1980s, and kind of still going strong now. Mark Reed did an absolutely amazing job of fitting this potential and getting superb agreement with all the data that we can get our hands on. When I show this to students and say, this is your goal, but it's actually unusual to have this amount of data. A lot of the materials I want to model, we don't have elastic constant data. We often only have structural data. But you know, we've been able to use this to model UO2. We're now looking at MOX, so mixed oxide fuels are coming into vogue because of the interest in this particular material for energy applications. I had a strange experience, well, I've had quite a few of those, but a particular strange experience a couple of years ago, at a conference on UO2, where I found I was the only theoretician there who was using potentials. Everyone else was using DFT. And I think using DFT for UO2 is really a classic case of using an absolutely enormous sledgehammer to crack a very small nut.
Well, to miss the nut as many.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't put it better myself. But anyway, what we're doing, and this is Scott Walker, who's a PhD student who's just finished writing up, and you know, we've used cell methods to model the lattice parameter and the properties of different compositions of NOx fuel, so we have a potential for the PuO2 now, which Mark and I are trying to get published in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, and so we can model these materials very accurately, and hopefully this will lead to a better understanding of these nuclear materials. Going to the other extreme, this is nuclear clocks, and this is an area where people are trying to develop tiny devices which are based on nuclear transitions rather than electron transitions. And this isotope of thorium was discovered, which has an unusually low nuclear excited state, ATV, which you can probe with vacuum UV. The idea is that you can get much more accurate time standards by developing these materials. And what they're trying to do is embed thorium into suitable crystal materials. Calcium fluoride is one, and these complicated metallic materials with fluoride type materials, lithium, calcium, aluminium fluoride, and lithium, strontium, aluminium fluoride are also being tested. So with a group in the States, we were able to look at thorium doping, and it's quite interesting. You can predict the site at which predict that it dopes at either the calcium or the strontium site, and the charge compensation is fluorine interstitials. It's interesting, and we find the same behaviour in calcium fluoride. And where we have had a successful collaboration with DFT calculations, we've also we've looked with a group in Vienna who have expertise in this area, have modelled calcium fluoride with thorium to see if the presence of the defects affects the band gap, which luckily it doesn't. And crystals are also being grown, but we're not using the 229 isotope of thorium, because that costs $50,000 per milligram. So you don't want to go down to the stores and ask for that. But the 232 is a little bit cheaper. The idea is that hopefully in terms of crystal growth, they can affect the crystal growth with a cheaper isotope, and then do the more expensive one. Okay, I like this because when I first saw it, I thought, wow, it's green, and then it was pointed out it's green because someone was pointing a green laser pointer. There we are. But that's a crystal of 232 thorium calcium fluoride. So it is really going to happen. These crystals are going to grow. Okay, rounding up now. Other active areas. So the modelling of optical materials is very much inspired by Patrick where we're looking at things like surface properties. So we're looking to see if we know plenty about the dopants in the bulk materials, but we're interested in looking at the dopants in the see how they affect the actual shape of the material, morphology, because if you're using them for devices, it's obviously important to understand that. And then this last one, which I mentioned because rather to my surprise, I'm attending a conference in Germany next week and giving a talk on lithium niobate modelling. This was something which was done first in the 1980s, was being revisited, and lithium niobate is still a material of great interest. We want to learn more about that, I guess, next week. So, to conclude, in helping Richard and myself organising this, and myself emailing a lot of people, I did get quite a few apologies from people who couldn't come, couldn't be here. John Vale I'll particularly mention in a moment. Roger Batesold said he'd be there in spirit. I think we know what sort of spirit he's referring to. Darryl from South Africa, David Smith from the United States, Bud Bridges, another person who knew Patrick well, Miguel Moreno from Spain, Wynne Roberts, who worked with Patrick Imperial, or didn't actually work with him, but shared a lab with him at Imperial when Patrick was at Imperial College. Peter Sushko, from locally, Martin Nicol from the Czech Republic, my colleague Mario, who really did intend to come, but then got confused in a very Mario manner with his timetable, and realised that he couldn't come because he had 10 hours of teaching this week. Bill Neath, who I showed a photo of earlier, Neil Allen, who's someone people know here, and Alan Lydiard, and I think we also hoped Professor Sir John Thomas would have been able to give a talk here, but he wasn't able to attend.
Yeah, I have a message for him, and I'll read it.
Which we'll read later, yeah. But I just wanted to show you the letter I got from John Vale. If you don't want to read all the text, just read the last bit. But he focuses on where he met Patrick, and about, of course, one thing that people haven't said is, of course, that Patrick, or not really focused on so much, of course, he was born in South Africa. He came to London and he was at Imperial College, and then moved from Imperial College to Canada. So what John here refers to as Patrick's second career, we in Canada were fortunate to share his second career in Ontario. And he also mentioned there's a conference in Riga, which Eugene mentioned earlier as well. But anyway, John, who many of you know, sends his very best wishes. So I should conclude. Personally, for me, Patrick had a considerable, was an understatement, an enormous impact on my career. He always showed an interest in what I was doing. He was very probing in his questions. He didn't answer with enough detail, there'd be a follow-up question. Friendly advice was always appreciated. Richard and I are planning a special journal issue as a result of this meeting, which I guess Richard said later. I hope that can be a fitting contribution, a fitting tribute to his very many contributions to our field. I'm very grateful to you all for attending this, and I hope you're enjoying it. We're halfway through, so there's lots more interesting talks to come this afternoon. So that's it. So thanks for your attention.
The thorium in calcium fluoride, presumably that forms a tightly bound cluster with fluoride ion interstitials.
Well, what we've done so far is, yeah, I mean, yes, it sits at the calcium side,
Yeah.
and the fluorine interstitials are
Jacobs
close by. We'll add that to the next paper.
With respect to MOX, do we plan
main interest is not about pure material but defects.
Yeah.
Helium and fusion products. Do you plan any something like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mark.
And also there's segregation and aggregation of the plutonium in the box fuel as well at different concentrations.
Yeah. I mean, initially we want to look at hydrogen and UO2, but once that's working, there's no reason to extend it to, not to extend it to more complex materials.
Should we take into account one device as well?
Absolutely, yeah.
Not so simple.
Yeah.
That was an interesting exchange about using of abolition methods for the uranium oxide. So in that regard, do you have any potential developments for actinoids fluorides?
For
uranium fluoride or other actinoids fluoride?
Not as yet, but
because the thing is that this is equally important material, right? But as far as the ab initio calculations go, right, this is where standard DFT breaks down spectacularly. This is one of the systems where if you don't use the dispersion correction, you get the lattice constant wrong by 40%. 40.
It's a layer structure.
Yes. It's a quasi-molecular structure, although it's technically not molecular crystal, but it's quasi-molecular structure, and dispersion correction is very, very important there. I think you can easily develop the force fields which would be adequate. It's not so easy to develop the DFTD because there are no potential, so no D corrections available for actinoids.
okay.
So.
That's an excellent, thank you, it's a good suggestion.
I mean, we're certainly considering other forms like the nitrides and carbides for next generation fuels. So, techniques are priority.
Thank you, Rob. Well, we're exactly on time, and knowing Patrick would have been very pleased with this. We'd like to be punctual, so let's thank this morning's speaker.